Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. And from the time that the daily shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Daniel chapter 12, verse 12. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,330 days. The daily in the book of Daniel and the New World Order, written by Marion Barry, copyrighted in 2002. Chapter 13. The daily sovereignty of the nations taken away. Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. And from the time that the daily shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. The two different meanings of the term taken away. The term taken away is found in connection with the daily in Daniel chapter 8, verses 11 to 13, and then again in chapter 12, verse 11. But the Hebrew word is different in Daniel chapter 12 from that which was used previously in Daniel chapter 8. The term taken away in Daniel chapter 8 comes from the Hebrew word rum. The Hebrew word for taken away in Daniel chapter 8, verse 11 is word number 7311 in the Strong Analytical Concordance. The Hebrew word is rum, pronounced rum, that has the meaning of exaltation, revealing how the Pope exalted himself, gaining moral authority until in AD 538 he was granted by Justinian, Emperor of Rome, by decretal letter, the scepter of power, seat and authority, the daily, as it was gradually being taken away from the Roman Caesars. This action of self-exaltation is expressly described in Daniel chapter 8 as follows. Reading from Daniel chapter 8, verse 11. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And this is again paraphrase. Setting up a counterfeit priesthood and taking the prerogative of Jesus Christ. And by him, the daily, the power to rule, was taken away, and the place of his, Caesar's sanctuary or palace in the city of Rome, was cast down. Rome fell in AD 476, and the popes began their 1260-year reign from AD 538 to 1798. The term taken away in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11 comes from a different Hebrew word, which is the word sur. The term taken away in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11 comes from the Hebrew word number 5493, sur, and as the meaning of that which is laid aside or put down. Taken away, the Hebrew word 5493 or sur, a primary root, to turn off, lay away, put away, down, remove, take away, be without, according to the Strong Analytical Concordance. The beast in Revelation chapter 13 cannot reign over all the world, nor impose his mark of authority upon the people until all the nations have laid aside their sovereignty and come under a one world government over which there will be a papal head. Contrary to popular opinion, the beast will not be merely a religious figure, but will have political power as well, so that he will use the nations to enforce his dogma as he did during the first papal reign from AD 538 to 1798. He will need the New World Order to gain complete control. The Pope will gain the power to rule over a New World Order and individuals by establishing his mark of authority. Revelation explains that the Pope will have a mark of authority, a sign that he has grasped the daily power to rule with great authority over all men and nations. The mark will be a sign that he is the religious and political ruler over all men. It is a sign of allegiance described as follows. Revelation chapter 13, verses 7, 8, and 16. And power to rule the daily was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell on the earth shall worship him. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. These were excerpts. A universal worldwide Sunday law will be the mark or sign of papal authority. It is the goal of popery to become both a political and religious controlling force over the entire world. A worldwide Sunday law will establish the Pope's ultimate authority in both realms of religion and politics. By getting control of all the gold and all the silver, it is his desire to bring every individual and nation under his rule. According to the Greek Controversy, page 449, the enforcement of Sunday keeping will be an enforcement of the worship of the beast. It is Satan's everlasting desire to be worshipped and to bring all intelligent beings under his control. By human agencies, Satan uses whoever and whatever is available to accomplish his purpose. A Sunday law is in direct opposition to the Ten Commandments laws of the Creator God. Whereas the fourth commandment requires worship on the seventh day of the week, the papacy long ago attempted to change the day over from Saturday to Sunday, the first day of the week. Now we know that it's no longer Saturday according to the true biblical calendar. However, Sunday was a counterfeit day for sun worshippers. It was brought into Christianity in the early centuries. The papacy claims that God gave them the privilege of changing the day of worship, but no man has such authority. They also point to the fact that nearly all Christendom honors the Sunday as proof that they had the right to change the day. Therefore, Sunday worship is the mark or sign of papal authority. Sunday worship is in direct opposition to the laws and government of God's kingdom. Worship is the key end-time issue of the three angels' messages, which will swell into the loud cry. The first angel's message is this, Revelation chapter 14, verse 7. Worship him that made heaven and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of water. The fourth commandment reminds us to worship the Creator. In Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 and 9, excerpt. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. Again, the third angel's message warns against the counterfeit worship as follows. Revelation chapter 14, verse 9. If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand. The 7-day Sabbath, according to the true biblical calendar, as restored by the Millerite, the 7-day Sabbath is the sign of loyalty to God's government. But the Sunday counterfeit is the sign or mark of the beast, the government of man. A law without enforcement is useless. Therefore, it is the worldwide Sunday law itself or decree that will begin to enforce its observance. Enforcement may become more harsh as time goes by, but it is the decree itself which will begin the persecution of God's people. Daniel explains how to begin and count out a timeline. Many people view the prophecies of Revelation that pertain to the future with fear and a dark outlook. They need to understand the prophecies of Daniel, especially the timelines of Daniel chapter 12, to give them hope and courage. At present, most Bible students do not know how to begin or end these timelines, or how to count them out to understand their messages of hope and blessing. They do not know what guidelines or precedents or hermeneutic principle to follow. But Daniel has promised that the wise shall understand, according to Daniel chapter 12, verse 10. It is the prophet Daniel himself who has provided the information as to how to begin and count out a timeline. He has given a precedent which is dependable and consistent in beginning and counting all 7 of the timelines in the book of Daniel. Daniel sets the precedent to count out timelines. A biblical timeline cannot be useful until it can be determined what it is that consistently begins and ends timelines. In the book of Daniel, there are 7 timelines. The first timeline in Daniel chapter 4 explains how a timeline begins, checking out for accuracy in application of precedents. As Daniel explains the actions which began the first timeline of 7 times or years that applies to Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation, a precedent was set that established an hermeneutic principle as to how all 7 timelines in the book of Daniel begin and end. These rules may be checked out for accuracy in the first 4 timelines. There's number 1, the 7-year timeline found in Daniel chapter 4, verse 16. Number 2, the 1260-year day timeline in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. Number 3, the 2300-year day timeline in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. Number 4, the 70-week timeline in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. Number 5, the 1260 literal days timeline in Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. Number 6, the 1290 literal days timeline in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. Number 7, the 1335 literal days timeline in Daniel chapter 12, verse 12. The first timeline in Daniel chapter 4, verse 17 and verse 24 began with a decree, and yes, the 1260 timeline in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25 began with Justinian's decretal letter giving the popes both temporal and religious power to rule. And yes, the 2300 timeline in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14 began with the decree or commandment to rebuild Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, as did the 70 weeks timelines of Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. The last 3 timelines are in Daniel chapter 12. These same hermeneutic principles or precedents should be applied to the last 3 timelines as well. When it is found that these precedents or rules in Daniel chapter 4 apply consistently to the first 4 timelines, then those conclusions can also be checked out to see if they harmonize with the prophetic description of future events found in the last 10 chapters of the Great Controversy. It would be out of the character of God to present 3 timelines in Daniel chapter 12 without giving any inspired clue as to how to begin or count them out. The timelines are preceded by the question, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? The answer lies within the 3 timelines which follow. God has provided the information necessary to know what begins timelines right within the book of Daniel itself. 3 precedential actions begin a timeline. The first timeline in the book of Daniel began with three significant actions, which are precedents or hermeneutic principles. Number one, a decree. This matter is by the decree of the watchers. This is the decree of the Most High, as found in Daniel chapter 4, verses 17 and 24. Number two, a fulfilled prophecy. Daniel chapter 4, verse 33. The same hour was the thing prophesied fulfilled. Number three, a speaking voice. Daniel chapter 4, verse 31. There fell a voice from heaven saying, O Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken. The scientist studies the book of nature to discover the laws of nature so that he can harness the forces of nature to work for the good of humanity. The Bible student studies God's other book, the Bible, to discover the hermeneutic principles so that they can be harnessed to produce truth, important for man's survival and salvation. And now we're entering into another hermeneutic principle, which we find on page 102, and it's hermeneutic principle number 11. Daniel chapter 4, verse 17, verse 24, verse 31 and 33 timeline in the book of Daniel begin and end with number one, fulfilled prophecy in Revelation. Number two, a speaking voice of a government on earth or in heaven, which is number three, a legislative or judicial decree. And this is found in the Greek Controversy, page 442. A universal worldwide Sunday law fits all three criteria. Number one, a Sunday law is a decree. Number two, a Sunday law will be a fulfilled prophecy of Revelation chapter 13, verses 4 and 5. Number three, a Sunday law will be the speaking voice of papal governmental rule. So therefore, a universal worldwide Sunday law fits all three criteria. The speaking voices of Revelation are legislative decrees. There are three texts in Revelation chapter 13 that have to do with speaking voices. They are as follows. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking, and he spake as a dragon, that the image of the beast should both speak. This is found in Revelation chapter 13, verses 5, 11, and 15. The speaking voice in Revelation chapter 13, verse 5 deals with a legislative action or law which pertains to the beast and his mark of authority. Speaking voices of nations are legislative action. An inspired statement explains what these speaking voices are as follows. And now we're entering into another hermeneutic principle, and we are now at number 12. The hermeneutic principle found in the Greek Controversy, page 442. The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. The legislative action can be that of a government on earth or the government of heaven. In Daniel chapter 4, verse 31, the speaking voice that came from heaven was also the decree of the Most High. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 5, the speaking voice, the decree, or universal Sunday law, is issued from the beast. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 11, the speaking like a dragon is that of the governmental legislative action of a national Sunday law in the United States of America. Again, in Revelation chapter 13, verse 15, it is the United States of America or the image of the beast which speaks or legislates the final death decree. When the papal government, the Holy See in council with the New World Order, passes a worldwide Sunday law, that speaking action will have formed the decree by which the beast will establish its authority. Then it can use civil governmental powers to persecute God's saints. The future New World Government with papal head is called the abomination that maketh desolate by Daniel. The daily power to rule or sovereignty of the nations will be taken away or laid aside or put down in order to set up or establish the abomination that maketh desolate. A one world order or one world government with a papal head must first bring all nations under its control. Daniel says it this way, found in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. And from the time that the daily shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Daniel chapter 12, verse 11 explains that from the time that the daily or power to rule is taken away or laid down by the nations, so that the Pope may impose his mark of authority upon all men, you may begin counting out 1,290 literal days until the timeline will come to its end and his reign will end. Daniel and Revelation interpret each other. Daniel is the prophecy, and Revelation is the explanation of it. There is a peculiar relationship between the books of Daniel and the Revelation. Both of them are classified as apocalyptic prophecy. The two books should be studied together. The timeline in Daniel chapter 12 begin and end with legislative decrees, but those decrees are described in more detail in the book of Revelation. The prophecy is first given in Daniel, but explained in Revelation. In this way, Daniel and Revelation interpret each other and are one prophetic unit. Then the Bible becomes its own expositors, not man. There is a vast difference between the research of a true prophetic expositor who is seeking to find truth by use of the hermeneutic principles and those who are imposing their own theories and suppositions on the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. Again, we are coming to another important, beautiful principle, and this is number 13 from what we see here, and it is the hermeneutic principle of the Bible is its own expositor. The prophetic timelines are given in Daniel, but the prophecies of Revelation interpret or begin and end those timelines. The persecution and the persecutor. The 1260 timeline of Daniel chapter 12 verse 7 predicts or prophesies a future period of persecution. It shall be for a time, times and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter or shatter or break in pieces or persecute the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Again, according to Daniel chapter 12 verse 7. Persecution does not occur without a persecutor. Therefore, the 1260 and 1290 days begin at the same time. This was also true of the first reign of the papacy over Europe, in that the Papal Supremacy began in AD 538, and the Church fled into the wilderness to escape persecution at the same date. Why then is there a 30-day difference between the 1260 and the 1290 timelines? A study of final events reveals that God's people will be delivered from a death decree and further persecution at the voice of God that occurs at the beginning of the seventh plague. Revelation chapter 16 verse 17. After the voice of God's deliverance, there is continuing action under the seventh plague, that describes the fall of Babylon. Reading from Revelation chapter 17, verses 16 to 18, and chapter 18, verses 1 to 24, will reveal that. Therefore, the persecutor continues to exist through the fall of Babylon after the 1260 timeline ends. Counting out the timelines in the book of Daniel, for 13 years, Daniel had no knowledge as to how to count out the 2300 days years of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. He did not know with that event, what event or at what time to begin counting out that block of time. Finally, the angel Gabriel came to give him skill and understanding. Gabriel said to Daniel in chapter 9 verse 24, "Know therefore and understand that you begin counting the 2300, this is paraphrased, from the going forth of the commandment or decree." In like manner, the Lord himself tells us in Daniel chapter 12 verse 11 to start counting out the 1290 timelines from a specific event yet to occur. The word "from" is a key word that should be given notice also in Daniel chapter 12 verse 11. Gabriel said to Daniel, "I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. Understand the matter and consider the vision." When the time had come for him to know those things in like manner as current events lead into the final crisis, the time has come to unseal the timelines of Daniel chapter 12 and to know when to start counting out the 1290 days of Daniel chapter 12 verse 11. The vertical versus the horizontal views on the daily. In the book of Daniel, there are two views presented. In much of the book, earthly historical events such as the rise and fall of empires are called the horizontal view. This is the view that we see down here on earth. But in chapter 7, there are scenes which describe what is going on up in heaven regarding Christ's ministry and the judgment scene. This is called the vertical view. Each view has its proper place. It is necessary to determine which view is to be used in regard to the daily in Daniel chapter 12 verse 11. If the daily represented Christ's priestly ministry in heaven, as many claim today, but we are warned that we cannot know the time of the close of probation when his mediatorial ministry will end, how could that event up in heaven, which God's people cannot see, become a starting point by which to begin counting out the 1290 literal days? Both views are important, and Christ's ministry is most exalted, but one view must not be made to obscure the other. It is by the old practice of interchanging ideas or views that Satan has obscured and twisted the truth in every age. Again, looking at Daniel chapter 12 verse 11 paraphrased. "Know therefore and understand," Daniel chapter 9 verse 25, "that you begin counting out the 1290 timeline from the time that the daily or power to rule or sovereignty of all the nation shall be taken away, laid aside or put down by them, so that the abomination that maketh desolate, the papacy that will persecute and destroy, can be set up or be established to begin its reign, and there shall be 1290 literal days until he shall come to his hand, and none shall help him." This was reading from Daniel chapter 11 verse 45 and chapter 12 verse 11. There are many, including congressmen in the United States of America, leaders in Europe and in the Orient, and the masses who riot in various cities in the world, who resist advances toward the approaching one world government. People fear a world court, which would be above the supreme courts of the nations. Trade agreements which are taking away their employment, the IMF, which closes banks and controls finance, as well as the gradual erosion of personal freedoms. Many do not want their military placed under the United Nations forces, but the sovereignty of the nations or of individual will not be allowed to challenge the authority of a one-world government. Many are also fearful of the revived Roman Catholic court of the Inquisition. The nations are being forced into a new world order by ominous terrorist forces under the control of Satan himself. Partial fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12 verse 11 on September 12, 2002. George W. Bush, President of the United States, stood before the Assembly of the United Nations on September 12, 2002, to assure them that the United States will abide by the decisions of the United Nations. Peter Jennings, news commentator, remarked that these are the words the United Nations was waiting to hear. Then it was declared that the United Nations would take action in regard to the refusal of Iraq to permit inspectors to enter that country to look for weapons of mass destruction. Up to this point, the Western nations had shown reluctance to assist the United States in a war against Iraq because they saw that other nations were expected to submit their sovereignty, while the United States, taking the position of the peacekeeper for the world, was placing its sovereignty above that of the United Nations. Not until the United States would lay aside its daily power to rule the world and submit to the one world government would those nations rise to the occasion. We repeat, not until the United States would lay aside its daily power to rule the world and submit to the one world government will those nations rise to the occasion. On September 12, 2002, the United States, as world leader, led the way in submission to the New World Order, one world government in partial fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. This action was a partial fulfillment because there are two parts in the prophecy of Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. The first part is the daily sovereignty of the nations taken away or laid aside, but the second part is the setting up of the abomination that maketh desolate, placing the Pope as head of the one world government. The first part must precede and prepare the way for the second part to take place. Looking at the 1290 timeline chart, very, very important to understand what's coming. From the time the daily is taken away and laid aside and the abomination set up, it shall be, and then we look at the 1290 days, literal days, then this is when the Papal Supremacy reign number 2 appears. Looking at the side on the Book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 15, fulfilled at the effective date of the death decree. Revelation, chapter 13, verse 5, fulfilled the Universal Sunday Decree or mark of papal authority. And then, as we have seen, after the 1290 literal days, he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. An explanation is coming. Daniel 12 timelines are the counterpart of the Revelation chapters 13 and 14 of the third angel's message. Daniel 12 timelines are a warning about the same thing as the Revelation chapter 13 and chapter 14 third angel's warning message. Both are warning about the future one world government with papal head, which will bring the world to the final test and crisis. According to the Great Controversy, pages 449 and 450, and these are excerpts, the most fearful threatening ever addressed to mortals is contained in the third angel's message. Men are not to be left in darkness concerning this important matter. The warning against this sin is to be given to the world before the visitation of God's judgment. The same warning is given in Daniel chapter 12. In letter 161, 1903, let us read and study the 12th chapter of Daniel. It is a warning that we shall all need to understand before the time of the end. And we have reached now another hermeneutic principle, the final one, number 14, and it reads, the Bible is its own expositor. The prophetic timeline are given in Daniel, but the explanation or interpretation is found in Revelation. We repeat, the prophetic timelines are given in Daniel, but the explanation or interpretation is found in Revelation. Very important to remember this. The speaking voices that begin and end the timelines of Daniel are none other than the seven thunder or voices of Revelation chapter 10 that swell into the loud cry. When the timelines of Daniel chapter 12 give power to the third angel's message, it will swell into the loud cry. The Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 7, page 971, contains a comment on Revelation chapter 10 by Mrs. Ellen G. White that applies the seven thunders of Revelation chapter 10 to the ending of the 2300-day year timeline in AD 1844 and to the loud cry in the future. The inspired prophet has revealed to us the fact that Revelation chapter 10 is a prophecy with a dual application. Read carefully the following quotation. And we're going to read now from the basis of chapter 10 of Revelation, chapter 10 verse 11, chapter 14 verses 6 to 12, and Daniel chapter 12 verses 4 to 13. No less a person than Christ. And this is from Mrs. White. The mighty angel who instructed John was no less a personage than Jesus Christ, setting his right foot on the sea and his left upon the dry land, shows the part which he is acting in the closing scene of the great controversy. This position denotes his supreme power and authority over the whole earth. The controversy has waxed stronger and more determined from age to age, and will continue to do so to the concluding scenes, when the masterly working of the powers of darkness shall reach their height. Satan, united with evil man, will deceive the whole world, and the churches will receive not the love of the truth. But the mighty angel demands attention. He cries with a loud voice, a loud cry. After these seven thunders uttered their voices, the injunction comes to John as to Daniel in regard to the little book. Seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered. These relate to future events which will be disclosed in their order. Daniel shall stand in his lot at the end of the days. John sees the little book unsealed. Then Daniel's prophecy have their proper place in the first, second, and third angel messages to be given to the world. The unsealing of the little book was the message in relation to time, the 2300 timeline, and the 1260, 1290, 1335 timelines in the closing scenes. Again, this comes from the 770 Adventist Bible Commentary, page 971. This is the 7th volume. Apparently, one of the seven thunder voices applied to the message given regarding the ending of the 2300 timeline in Daniel chapter 8. The other six thunder voices apply to the beginnings and endings of the three timelines of Daniel chapter 12, yet to be proclaimed in the loud cry. Revelation chapter 10 is basically a loud cry message that declares that there shall be time no longer. Revelation chapter 10, verse 6. Daniel and Revelation are one. Testimonies to Ministers, page 117. The book of Daniel and the Revelation should be bound together. Revelation, following Daniel, as giving fuller light on the subject dealt with in Daniel, as showing that they both relate to the same subject. The Revelation chapter 10, verses 4 to 6, thunder voices, crying time no longer, loud cry message announces the end of all things. The timelines of Daniel chapter 12, as amplified in Revelation, declare that number 1, probationary time is coming to an end. Number 2, all prophetic time and timelines are coming to their end. Number 3, the persecution of God's remnant will come to its end. Number 4, the persecutor will also come to his end. For he shall come to his end, and none shall help him, according to Daniel chapter 11, verse 45. The importance of the speaking voices legislative action to the remnant people today. The United States of America, with a constitution that provides freedom of religion, has been a God-blessed nation. The separation between church and state has, to a great extent, prevented religious persecution. But when this nation initiates and enforces a national Sunday law, the way will be opened so that it will persecute and speak like a dragon, according to Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. This speaking voice or legislation will be of great concern to Sabbath keepers. The 3 timelines of Daniel chapter 12 end with speaking voices. The Daniel chapter 12 verse 7 timeline of 1260 literal days ends with the speaking voice of Revelation chapter 13 verse 15 that initiates a final death decree against the people of God. The Daniel chapter 12 verse 12 timeline of 1335 literal days ends with the speaking voice of Revelation chapter 16 verse 17. That speaking voice is the voice of God that delivers God's people from that death decree. The Daniel chapter 12 verse 11 timeline of 1290 literal days ends with speaking voices of doom in Revelation chapter 16 verse 18, which describe the fall of Babylon. The voice of God brings about the total release of God's people from any further expression. Surely, these great events are of great importance to the remnant. Revelation chapter 17 verse 12 also describes the interval between a legislative date and effective date of the final death decree that is known as the time of Jacob's trouble. What should be of greater interest to God's people than the prophetic promises that give assurance of their final victory under such a duress? Current apathy among some Sabbath keepers will change when these legislative actions occur. The voice of God of Revelation chapter 16 verse 17 locks all 3 timelines of Daniel chapter 12 into immovable positions. It is the voice of God that ties all 3 timelines of Daniel chapter 12 into one stable, immovable unit known as the paragon or model of perfection of end-time events. Number 1, it is the voice of God, which ends the 1335 literal days wait for deliverance. Daniel chapter 12 verse 12. It is the voice of God which ends the time of Jacob's trouble for God's people at that final deliverance. Number 3, it is the voice of God which also ends the oppression of God's people and begins the fall of Babylon described in Revelation chapter 16 verse 18, Revelation chapter 17 verses 16 to 18, and chapter 18 verses 5 to 24. So again, looking at this graphic, we can see the voice of God, which terminates the 1335 literal days wait, which terminates the 1260 literal days of persecution plus the 15 days, which is borrowed from 1290, and the 1290 literal days pagan reign with another 15 days. Those 15 days are the difference between 1290 and 1260 of 30, which announced the fall of Babylon. It is the voice of God that there is a coup d'etat or fatal blow to the wicked. The fall of Babylon continues its action described in Revelation chapter 18, verses 10, 17, and 19. The symbol Babylon places the 1 hour in a symbolic setting. The 1 hour symbolic time is decoded by the yearly principle to refer to 15 literal days. The daily is the key to understanding Daniel chapter 12, verses 7 to 12. The correct view of the daily is one of the keys that opens the meaning of the entire book of Daniel. The daily brings the theme of the rise and fall of empires into focus and a final conclusion. It reinforces the theme of the Bible of Eden lost and Eden restored. It opens up the meaning and makes it possible to count out the 1290 literal days timeline of Daniel chapter 12. The daily brings hope and courage to God's people today. The last chapter of Daniel, with its 3 timelines, bring hope and cheer to the hearts of those who know that a time of trouble and 7 last plagues will occur before the coming of Jesus. The timeline assures God's people that a future papal supremacy will not continue as it did in the past for more than 1,000 years. It will be a crisis that will soon come to its end in only a matter of days. And this is the hope that we receive from studying this wonderful truth of the book of Daniel. More specifically here, it was the study of the book of Daniel chapter 12. The next session, we will be studying chapter 14, the daily power to rule in the human heart. Revising now those very important hermeneutic principles. Number 1, in a prophetic historical outline, the sequential order of verses may not be violated. Number 2, the hermeneutic principle of the imperative of sequence and continuity in the exposition of prophetic outlines. Prophetic outlines verses must be kept in strict sequence and matched consistently to the sequence and continuity of historical events. Number 3, we are at page 9 now. Context is king. The hermeneutic principle of historical context. Truth out of its setting is error. A text out of context is a pretext. We are now at number 5. We have actually number 1, 2, 3 we saw here, and number 4. So we are now at the context of number 4. The hermeneutic principle of language context. Context determines whether a timeline is given in literal or symbolic language. The Great Controversy, page 599. The language of the Bible is to be understood in its most obvious literal meaning unless a figure or symbol is employed. Passing now to the next hermeneutic principle. The Bible is its own expositor of symbolism. This is number 5. Number 6. The hermeneutic principle of structural context permits the Bible to be its own expositor. It takes precedence over all human speculation. Now, at number 7, the hermeneutic principle of contemporary recognition of prophetic fulfillment. Not until a prophecy is very near its fulfillment or already fulfilled are God's people able to know of surety the exact application of a prophecy. Beautiful principle, isn't it? Entering now into number 8, hermeneutic principle define word meanings from the original Hebrew and Greek. Very important. The next hermeneutic principle found on page 54 is number 9. One verse of scripture or one truth may not destroy another. The spiritual aspect of Christ's ministry must not be permitted to obscure the information intended to give God's people an understanding of the political rise and fall of the nations and the great controversy struggle between good and evil. Going now to the next hermeneutic principle, which would be number 10. Verses in a prophetic historical outline must be kept in sequence, moving forward in time, fulfilled by the sequence of historical events. In each prophetic historical outline, each verse moves forward in time and in strict sequence. Each additional outline moves further forward in time with additional information. Each outline becomes more specific and detailed. Very important. Now we have reached number 11, which we saw in this study. Hermeneutic principle of Daniel chapter 4, verses 17, 24, 31, and 33. Timelines in the book of Daniel begin and end with number 1, fulfilled prophecy in Revelation. Number 2, a speaking voice of a government on earth or in heaven, which is number 3, a legislative or judicial decree. And this is according to the Great Controversy, page 442. Passing now to the number 12. Hermeneutic principle found in the Great Controversy, page 442. The speaking of the nation is the action of his legislative and judicial authority. Going now to number 13. Hermeneutic principle, the Bible is its own expositor. The prophetic timelines are given in Daniel, but the prophecies of Revelation interpret or begin and end those timelines. And number 14, and not the last and the least, hermeneutic principle, the Bible is its own expositor. The prophetic timeline are given in Daniel, but the explanation or interpretation is found in Revelation. Again, very, very important to understand and appreciate those hermeneutic principles. We have reached number 14 now, and this is why we encourage you again to study, study, study until you understand this important subject of the daily. And this has brought us now to the chapter 13, and we will again in the next session finalize this study with chapter 14. So we pray and ask the Lord right now at this moment that we understand these truths for today. Though written in 2002 and referring to some event past, these are blocks, building blocks that brings us where we are today in 2025. And as we see, the American Pope elected in May 2025, going from political leaders in Turkey and Lebanon to religious leader in Turkey and Lebanon. Something is brewing. And if we do not pay attention to these current events, because there are so many other things happening around us, we will miss to understand where we are in history, and especially missing the timeline of Daniel chapter 12, which are the last 3 timelines to occur on this earth, and finally bring the end of this great controversy. May the Lord bless you and covers you with his love until we meet again, and let us remain faithful. Christ is coming home to take us home very soon. He's coming. Maranatha.